And so our goal is pretty specific to educational environment in Wisconsin that denotes the greatest level of inclusion is 80% or more of the time in general education. And so we want the vast majority of our students with an IEP to be with their peers 80% or more of the time. And so I regularly get asked by parents and community members, well, if a student needs services outside of the general education classroom to develop their skills to be successful, then why wouldn't you support that? And absolutely, it's an IEP team decision.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Brighter Together podcast. My name is Janet Courtney, and my special guest today is Nancy Molfenter. And Nancy is the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services at Madison Metro School District in Madison, Wisconsin. And that is not a small district, is it, Nancy?
It is not a small district. It's not. So thank you so much for having me. We serve approximately 27,000 students in our school district in Madison.
Wow, that is fantastic. So tell me, Nancy, a little bit about your role and about what's going on in Madison.
Absolutely. So my role is primarily overseeing the processes related to the delivery of special education services. So from child find and evaluation, and then to the delivery of services. Myself and my team also support the evaluation, development, and provision of accommodations for Section 504 plans. So that's, those are kind of primarily the overarching services within the school district that I oversee. Of course, my work and the work of the team in student services touch a lot of other areas. And so we collaborate across many of the departments in the school district to ensure that students are having the best possible academic experiences and receiving the services and supports and accommodations that they require to be optimally successful.
Nice. Very nice. So that is a big task. That is a very big task, I'm sure. So what are some of the things that you guys are working on?
So at this point in time, based on data from the last 5 years plus, we have 3 overarching goals within the school district and the department for our students who have an IEP or a 504 plan. And so the first one is related to disproportionality. So many people who are listening, and you yourself, I'm sure, have heard of disproportionality in special education and other aspects of our educational system. And in the Madison School District, we have been identified under federal guidelines for a number of years as having disproportionality in special education for our Black students. And so we have a goal that we want to reduce that disproportionality through a couple of different avenues, right? So as you can imagine, we are working on professional learning for our staff around our evaluation processes and the assessments that we use. So within the field of special education and the assessments that are utilized, there's clear processes that we must use in special education or in evaluation to determine if a student might qualify for special education services. And so we utilize norm referenced assessments. We utilize a variety of them. We choose them based on the needs of the student and the concerns and the age range. And yet it's also relatively well known in the field of education that assessments come with some inherent bias, especially those that have been in place for a long time. So we think about what assessments we're using. We think about utilizing, a variety of assessments and getting multiple data points so that we can triangulate data. We have also developed in the school district something that we call a best practice evaluation. And what that means is that we ask, when we get a referral for potential need for special education services, we sit down with the parent and other people at the school who know the child, just to really think about, has the multi-tiered system of supports in one or more areas been afforded to that student? Have they had opportunities to have not only universal core instruction in academic areas and in social and emotional development, but have we thought about tiers 2 and 3? And have we collected data? And do we know how that child has responded? And in Wisconsin, we are a state where if a parent makes a referral, we can sit down and talk with the parent. But then if they want to proceed, we must proceed. But we've developed a very specific process for our staff to use to sit down and walk through the questions with the parent, so that they understand why we want to ensure that the student has been afforded opportunities before we move into an evaluation for potential need for special education services. In addition to the evaluation processes, we're also thinking about how and when students might exit from special education services. So we find in the Madison School District that there aren't frequent conversations about potential timeline to exiting from special education services. So we've just asked our staff, and we've developed a process for staff to look at what's happening for a student and have they met their goals, and might it be time for the team to get together and talk about whether or not the student could potentially exit from special education services.
Yeah, it's a fine line that you walk, for sure. You want to make sure that your students are getting the services they need, but you don't want to over-identify either. And you've been mandated to make sure that you're not. That's a tall order. You guys are filling in a very tall order. I don't envy the process, but it sounds like you guys have worked it out, and it seems to be working. How have your parents been responding to that, especially those that are asking for it? It sounds like there's been a really great conversation that's going on to help them to understand when a child needs services versus when a parent just wants services.
You're absolutely right. It is, it's a delicate topic. And it's also, so yes, we're working through this process that we've developed and this standardized set of questions that staff utilize. We're just helping parents to understand what we want to consider and helping them to understand that while we have a legal responsibility to assess students that might be struggling to see if they might qualify for special education service, we also have a legal responsibility that's just as strong on the other end, not to qualify students and identify them as having a disability when maybe there are other factors that have been at play. I would say that from my perspective, the parent response has been very positive, because at the end of the conversation, if a parent says, "Thank you for walking me through all these questions, but I still want to move forward," we don't hesitate to do that. Right. So We're really not trying to hold up evaluation processes. We just want to make sure, again, that a student has been given the opportunity to learn and even have their needs met outside of special education, if that's something that's possible through that multi-tiered system of support. So I think it's been positive. I know just in general, parents often have concerns about how long an evaluation process can take, so the legal timeline of, reviewing the existing data and then moving into assessments, and then that 60-day timeline, and then even another 30 days to write the IEP. So even when the process moves along as quickly as it possibly can, parents have concern sometimes about the length of time. So we try to do a lot of parent education around that as well, but it's not an instant request, and then an IEP being put into place can take a bit of time. We want to do it right, and we want to make sure that we're identifying not only the right students, but for the right needs, and then writing an IEP that's going to be supportive of the student.
Yeah. So you've mentioned MTSS multiple times. So you have a system in place for MTSS. Do you have a team that identifies students? How does that process work for you?
That's a great question. So each of our schools has a team that talks about on a weekly basis students that are coming up as having concerns, whether those concerns are academic or social and emotional and behavioral. And so we have a team at each school. It's comprised of someone who has special education expertise, school psychologist, school social worker, a principal or another administrator from the school also sits in those meetings. And so parents can raise concerns to the school team, or a teacher who has the student can, or even our school psychologist, the principal can sort of put information together in writing, and then that group of people gets together and talks about, okay, so what are the struggles that we're seeing for the child, what has been tried, and that's where MTSS really comes into play, right? So we know we have the universal core instruction, we have universal social and emotional learning strategies that are different for each building level, so our elementary schools. And as we move up from kindergarten to fifth grade, those change a little bit. Same thing for students entering into sixth and et cetera. And so we've applied the universal strategies that our teachers are taught. And then what is our next step? So we have some, specific tier 2 interventions. We have kind of a menu that our staff can choose from based on the particular challenges the student is having. And then we, have some scaffolding that's built into our core instruction in both reading, literacy, and math. And so the team at that school really gets together to talk about, what have we tried? Have we moved up to tier 2? Have we moved up to tier 3? And if not, then the team, that's where the conversation with teachers and family members, parents would come into play to just say, we really want to try some additional strategies before we move into evaluation. Again, if a parent wants an evaluation, we move forward with that timeline. Yep.
Yeah. And for those people that are not educators, and I don't know how many of those are going to be listening, but let's give them a little bit about MTSS is all about identifying students that may have a difficulty, but hopefully not keeping them through the whole process, keeping them off of an IEP. Let's not put them in special education. If we can do some intervention that will prevent them from needing a full evaluation and then going into a special education and being identified as needing special education services. So have I said that correctly? I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything, Nancy.
No, I think that was fantastic. I think that for people who aren't in education or don't have experience with a multi-tiered system of support, just some of the specific maybe examples of what that could look like. It might just be a check-in and check-out system that a regular education teacher uses with a child just to make sure that they're ready for learning when the lesson is about to start, and maybe checks in with them in the middle of a lesson and at the end of a lesson. And if a student has clearly missed a couple of key concepts during a lesson, then the general education teacher can find a time to support that student to have another review. We can also, within general education, we have interventionists in reading and math. We also, within our schools in Madison, we have people with expertise in social and emotional learning and behavior strategies. And so they can run small groups. So students might have a small group maybe once a week during specials time. We really try hard not to pull students out of their core instruction in literacy and math, but we can run small groups within those. So, even for those of us, for myself, it was quite a long time ago that I was in elementary school, but I remember that there were different reading groups. And so there were, students who may have been ahead of grade level a bit, and they might be reading something a little bit different than the next group. And then there might be another group that is working hard to catch up, and they have a reading interventionist or a teacher who works with them. And we can do all of those. We can provide all of those options to students in our schools and in our classrooms outside of special education. So it's not only special education that can provide some more small group and individualized instruction. And sometimes people don't realize that that's the case.
Yeah. And it can also be, for us at Lighthouse, we have several contracts. We work with schools where we do have an SLP or an OT that are providing short-term intervals, as well. We know that this child I'm a speech therapist for those of you that don't know, but we know this child has an issue with maybe a specific sound, right, for articulation. And it's not something that is really it needs an IEP, but we don't want that to continue because that can affect their phonics and their reading and how all that goes. So they do 6 weeks and it's incredible. And we've seen such great progress, which I'm sure you guys are seeing as well, keeping getting students the support that they need early on so that they don't need an IEP. And that one piece that's missing somewhere, making those connections for that child is huge, because now we have a child who's ready to learn, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
No. Yeah. No, I was just going to move into, I think, that this part of our conversation is related to another goal that we have, which, we, like, I would say probably the majority, if not all school districts, we're regularly looking at our proficiency data, and not just standardized tests. Of course, standardized tests and school report cards are important, but we have interim assessments as well that we utilize. And so we're pretty continuously looking at reading and math proficiency rates. And then for me, in my role, I pull the data to look at students with an IEP, students with a 504 plan, and what their proficiency rates are. And so as a district and a department, we would really like to see our proficiency rates increase in reading and math. And so our multi-tiered system of support is a part of that. Something else that people don't realize is if a student has an individual education program or IEP, and it's a discrete set of services, right? So I think sometimes people think special education and having an IEP means that you're with special educators all day, every day.
All day, every day, inclusive, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For the majority, the majority, I would say it's about 1% of students with an IEP who are with special education staff most of the time. But the majority of our students with an IEP are in general education classes, and they have a set of services. Some of them are in their general education classrooms, and some of them are maybe in a small group or individualized outside of the classroom, so that they are prepared to learn in their core classes, right? So it may be some pre-teaching, it may be some reteaching, check-ins and check-outs. It may be very direct instruction on those skills that we've identified through assessment processes that they need to catch up on in order to be at grade level. So we look at our data, and we have a very serious goal to increase our proficiency rates in reading and math for our students with an IEP. And we do that through thinking about what interventions are we providing, what is our data telling us about what interventions are the most effective? How are we intervention matching for our students to make sure that our special education teachers, when they provide specially designed instruction, for 15 or 20 minutes or a half an hour a day, that they're teaching the right skills and in ways that that student is absorbing and learning and is able to apply those in the classroom. And so that's a second overarching goal that we have, and we look at the data for all of our levels and compare it to students without an IEP, and just want to help accelerate that growth for our students with an IEP.
Yeah, so it's very intentional. It's very, very intentional. That's good.
Extremely. Yes.
And then you also talked about inclusion, right? So making sure that students that are on an IEP are in the general classroom more than not, right? So
absolutely, yes. And so all three of these goals are really integrally connected, right? Because we know that students, just like all of us, it's really hard to learn any information or materials that you're not exposed to, right? So we know that our students, in order to learn the grade level reading content, in order to learn the grade level math content and other subjects too, right? Once you get into middle and high school, we're talking about science and social studies and even art and music. And so we know that they need to be present, but we also know that in order to feel like I'm welcomed and I'm part of my school community, just like everybody else, that I need to be together with my peers. And so our goal is pretty specific to the educational environment in Wisconsin that denotes the greatest level of inclusion is 80% or more of the time in general education. And so we want the vast majority of our students with an IEP to be with their peers 80% or more of the time. And so I regularly get asked by parents and community members, well, if a student needs services outside of the general education classroom to develop their skills to be successful, then why wouldn't you support that? And absolutely, it's an IEP team decision. Right. However, I remind people that because we're looking at the most inclusive educational environment, which is 80% or more, that does leave time for direct instruction, for small group, for individual work. But it really supports inclusion in general education the majority of the time. And so I just remind, I think people sometimes hear that we're working to increase inclusion and they worry that students won't get what they need. And we absolutely want students to have the kind of support and services that they need. And we believe that almost all students can get that in the 20% or less of their school day.
Yeah. And when you think about a 5-day a week, 20% is one day. It's one day out of, I mean, I'm sure it does not break down that way, but when you talk about the basic math of 80%, 4 out of 5 days is 80%. So, you can still meet that goal and still have a full day's worth of instruction that might be in a resource room or special education. What about co-teaching? Do you have some of that going on as well? I bet you do. I bet you do.
We absolutely do. And I would say that we have the degree to which our general education teachers and our special education teachers are co-teaching varies from school to school.
Yeah, of course.
We definitely work to provide professional learning around best practices in co-teaching and stress that that's the best way to do it, right? It's really the best thing to do is to have our general education teachers working very closely with our special educators to know what are we teaching in the classroom? What's our daily learning goal? What are our weekly learning goals? So that our special educators are best prepared to scaffold from core and be in the classroom helping to teach. And so absolutely, I mean, co-teaching is one of the sort of phenomenal strategies that we know we need to continue to support our teachers to understand and utilize. So
and as an SLP, it was the same thing when I was actually doing therapy was what are they doing in class right now? Because that's really what I need to be, especially for reading comprehension and kids with language delays. I really wanted it to be functional. Functional sessions are so, when it makes sense and they can carry it over into what they're doing in class. It's the skill, you're teaching the skill, but you're teaching the skill in a way that the child is going to be able to use when they go into the gen ed classroom. So I know as SLPs, that's something we do a lot with our SPED teachers and with our gen ed teachers is doing that same kind of thing. So sounds like you've got great teams and great things happening there. So
we do. I would say, this is the last day of school this school year we happen to be recording this podcast on the last day of school for our teachers. And
June 12th, 2025 for those, because it'll be a couple of months before this comes out. So I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
I happen to be recording, but just having been at a few of our schools this week, I am constantly amazed at the incredible work of our special educators, our general educators, our related services providers, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, school psych, school social workers.
Takes a village, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. And we do, I hear, in my role, I hear from people sometimes who aren't completely satisfied, whether it's parents or staff, but the amazing work that happens every day, it's just, I'm always impressed, and our students are learning, and many are really thriving. So it's wonderful to be in schools, right?
Absolutely. There's nothing like it. There is nothing like seeing a child get a concept that you've worked and worked and worked on, and that light bulb moment. It's like, ooh, that makes me emotional because I just love that so much. That's part of who we are as educators, is loving on those kids and showing them how incredibly fun it is to learn, and how making it fun to learn instead of a drudgery and something that they hate because it's hard, so. Okay, I have one last question, and I try to ask all of my podcast guests this one question, and this is, and you cannot talk about money because we all need more money. All educators need more money. But if you could miraculously solve one challenge in your school, in your role, something that you're working with, what would you want to solve?
If I could solve one issue, it would be that Um, that's a really tough question.
Mm.
Um,
Because there's lots, right? I know. I can see
yeah,
your brain going,
yeah.
maybe this,
Yep,
maybe that.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
about multiple different. Now,
Yeah.
I would say that what I would like to solve is that students that educators as a whole, and working together in partnership with families, um, would gain an understanding about today's children and what supports them to walk into schools and walk into classrooms and be excited. So just kind of piggybacking off of what you just said, right? I mean, yes, I was a special education teacher myself prior to my current role, and there is nothing like the feeling that you've helped a child to learn something. And sometimes it's something that they're going to use for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I worked for a number of years as a transition teacher, helping students with disabilities to transition from high school to adult life. And there is nothing like just knowing that you've taught them a skill that they're going to be able to get a job and, earn a living. But even a reading concept or a math concept, it's just amazing. And I think that I hear a lot of talk now in our schools and among colleagues from other districts about students really need a different kind of environment today. I mean, they've all had devices for their whole life,
Right.
lived through the pandemic, and I think we're still figuring out in the education system how to create that environment in our schools and in our classrooms where they walk in and they're excited about learning and ready to be engaged. I think the shift is still happening. So if I could solve it more quickly, like how do we light the fire for students of wanting to learn and be excited to being excited to be at school, and if they're on their devices, they're doing it to learn,
Right.
And so
Not just texting or whatever it is. Yeah.
right, it's just part of their life now. So how do we use what their needs are to excite them about learning? And I just think we're still figuring it out as a whole.
Yeah.
Like not,
But we are trying. I think it is a challenge that is actively being addressed, in so many different ways. And we could do a whole nother podcast on that, but
absolutely, yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And when we're already really over time, and I promised to keep it within, and I'm already over. So, because it's been a great conversation, Nancy, thank you so much. Where should people go if they want to learn more about what's going on with Madison and with you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I would say the best thing to do would just be to go to our website. So it's the Madison Metropolitan School District in Madison, Wisconsin. And we have lots of fabulous information on the school district website. And then there's also, you can also get to the special education department and student services pretty readily through our website. You can also find me putting my name into that search bar, Nancy Molfenter, and our special education plan with those 3 goals and our strategies. That's publicly available on our website. So I'm always happy to answer questions, and I'm always happy to collaborate with other special education directors and other colleagues around the state and country because we all learn from each other. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy, once again, for being on the Brighter Together podcast, because we really are brighter together.
you're welcome. Thank you for having me.